"If there's nothing else, Mom, please go up and rest. I'll also go and sleep," Jacob said. "Okay, I'll just check on Mom once." Mila smiled and went upstairs. She was busy with work and rarely spent any time with her family. Therefore, Grandma complained about it a lot. She took a more permanent position this time to spend more time at home with Grandma and Jacob. Jacob walked to a room on the first floor and knocked. "Who is it?" An alert voice came through the door. Jacob was stupefied for a moment before he realized that it was Noah's room. Kathy's room was next to it. It sounded like a large number of treasures were knocking into each other in the room. That was the sound of Noah putting a room full of treasures back into his storage space. This kid was as wealthy as a country, but he was so stingy that he didn't want to spare a penny. He hastily put everything away since he thought Jacob wanted to come inside. Jacob had already moved on to the other door. "Kathy." Here, come in," Kathy said. Jacob slowly opened the door after hearing Kathy's response. Kathy was sitting at the foot of the bed with her legs crossed. "What are you doing?" Jacob asked. "Cultivating." Kathy smiled in embarrassment. "But it doesn't seem to be improving." She was very hardworking, despite her limited talent. However, she was still hanging around level 3 and level 4 of the Chi refinement realm. On the other hand, her disciple, Sophie, had exceeded her. Sophie was only one step away from reaching level 10 of the Chi refinement realm and advancing toward the Foundation establishment realm. "Take it slow. You can't rush this," Jacob said. It took him a lot of effort to reach the 3rd level of the Spirit Concentration Scroll. "Did you help out at Helen's today?" Kathy stretched her legs while asking. "Yes, they wanted to keep me for dinner too, but I insisted on coming back home," Jacob said. "Their family has always been nice to you." Kathy looked down and smiled. "Yeah." Jacob smiled at the thought of Sophie's family, not knowing what else to say. It suddenly started to rain heavily outside. "Sophie seems to be very talented in cultivation," Kathy continued. She could sense that Sophie was leveling up faster than her. Although they were practicing the same technique, they gave off different auras. "Sophie has experience and foundation. Don't worry, you'll find your pace as well," Jacob said. "Yes, I plan to spend tonight cultivating and seeing if I can improve," Kathy nodded firmly and said. Jacob smiled at her determination. He left her room and went back to the living room. It was raining cats and dogs outside the window. Who knew how many human cultivators were sneaking into the city under the cover of a night like this? Even the elder from North Atlantic who was in charge of the rainfall probably couldn't detect these human cultivators. It was actually the best opportunity to practice lightning cultivation in a thunderstorm. However, it was probably not a good idea to sneak outside when both of his parents were home. Jacob thought for a bit and decided to go back to his room to cultivate. However, Fifth Heaven was filled with nature essence and seemed like a great place to cultivate. 1 hour up there was equivalent to 3 hours on land. What would happen if I summoned heavenly lightning on Fifth Heaven? And what would happen if I can find a deserted valley in Fifth Heaven and created a cave there? My identity wouldn't be exposed since I have a 5-elemental cultivation technique. Sophie is now considered a human cultivator since she lost her dragon core. Kathy is an authentic human cultivator, and Jade and Julia are not dragon cultivators to begin with. The 5 of us would probably not cause any suspicion on Fifth Heaven. An idea suddenly appeared in Jacob's mind. The next morning, Jacob and Kathy got up early to catch the first bus outside of the house to go back to college. Jacob leaned against the bus window and looked at the city that had been washed clean by last night's storm while circulating the Sword Shadow Scroll. Last night, he had successfully solidified his realm in his small room on the 2nd floor, and the new openings he acquired after using the two dragons' array formation were now filled with essence. He had experienced a similar incident prior, but he didn't know that his steady cultivation progress was all thanks to Kathy. While Kathy cultivated, the life note would suck the nature essence in the nearby areas into the house, but her body type couldn't absorb it all. Thus, Jacob got all the benefits. "Tonight, are you still going to Sophie's home and tutoring her?" Kathy asked him abruptly. "Yeah," Jacob nodded, and by now the Sword Shadow Scroll had finished one cycle. Kathy smiled and didn't reply. The bus arrived at the gate of the university, and they got off. "I'm going to the dorm for my books. You'd better prepare for the class as well." Jacob quickened his steps and walked toward his dorm. During the weekend, Jacob destroyed half of the South Atlantic Dragon Palace and had been to Fifth Heaven. However, no matter how colorful his weekend life was, he was an ordinary student at the college. Sam and the other guys didn't see any differences in Jacob and chatted with him as usual. Even though Jacob now could fly up into the sky, he didn't think he was so different from his buddies in college. After lunch in the cafeteria, he took a bus to the Martial Arts Academy downtown. Elder Frank's Martial Arts Academy was very popular. Even during the lunch break, each of the VIP rooms was occupied. Obviously, keeping fit by practicing martial arts instead of yoga or going to the gym had become a new trend lately. Of course, the innermost room was reserved for Jacob. Who would have thought that the popular Frank's Martial Arts Academy, which had chains in every major city in the country, also served as the cultivation place for the dragon cultivators? With the supreme VIP card in his hand, Jacob directly entered the innermost room, which then teleported him to a forest with 2 top-tier spirit stones. Any human cultivators would be jealous over the treatment that Jacob got. The dragon cultivator, who guarded the teleportation array in the forest, had seen Jacob last time. After witnessing Jacob's great power, the cultivator had very high regard for him. In the forest, several other young cultivators were practicing. The Martial Arts Academies Elder Frank operated had 2 functions. One was to station the people of North Atlantic all over the country and even the world. The other was to provide a practice venue for dragon cultivators. After all, they could only have low-level competitions in the small energy spheres they built themselves. They would need a big place for serious competitions. Besides, there were more and more young cultivators living in the city, and it was a serious crime if an inspector found them having large-scale fights in the city. Elder Frank's martial arts academies could solve this problem for cultivators. They could be teleported to a remote forest away from the big city by the array. This way, they didn't have to fly during the day, and they could practice their cultivation techniques freely in the forest, protected by defensive array formations without the fear of attracting the attention of the mortal world. Walking out of the teleportation array to the center of the forest, Jacob saw 6 young cultivators fighting. Among them, 4 were at 3rd level and 2 were at 5th level. 2 of the 3rd level cultivators were girls. From the colored lights they were emitting, Jacob knew that the 2 5th level guys were from an Earth Elemental Dragon clan, while the 2 3rd level guys were from the Lake branch of the Water Elemental Dragon clan. The 4 3rd level cultivators were combining forces against 1 5th level cultivator who was using a heavy cultivation technique, unleashing a series of square blocks. One of the 3rd level Water Elemental Dragons slashed out a pale blue light wave with her short whip, forcing the 5th level cultivator to back off 2 steps. The other 2 3rd level cultivators took the opportunity to attack, and the 5th level cultivator couldn't block them. He flew 5 meters backward and stumbled. Jacob had just entered the forest and was walking by the stumbling 5th level cultivator, so he placed his hand on this cultivator's back, helping him to gain his balance. "Chris, you lost!" The other 5th level cultivator, who was standing on the side and acting as the referee, yelled gloatingly. The 5th level cultivator who was knocked back was reluctant to admit defeat. He looked back at Jacob and slapped his hand off him. His slap was hard. Unprepared, Jacob got a red mark on his wrist. "If this idiot didn't come in and distract me, I wouldn't have lost." The cultivator named Chris glared at Jacob and growled. Even with his mild temper, Jacob was angry at this accusation. He knew this forest was not open to him alone, so he didn't interrupt their competition, and even helped the cultivator to regain his balance when he stumbled. Chris looked back at Jacob again and sneered. "What? You are a little 3rd level cultivator. Would you dare to be angry with me?" Although Jacob emitted the deep blue light and was from one of the 4 oceans, Chris was an earth elemental dragon and didn't need to be worried. As long as Jacob wasn't a metal elemental dragon, this 5th level cultivator felt like he could do anything to a little 3rd level cultivator. Having lost face in front of other lower level cultivators, he wanted to vent his anger on Jacob and show his higher ranking as a 5th level cultivator. Just like how lower year students were a little cautious around upper year students in school, lower powered cultivators were fearful of higher powered cultivators. Seeing that they were having a competition here, Jacob wanted to find another spot to practice by himself. But now his temper was up. He raised his hand and slapped the 5th level cultivator, sending him flying by half a meter. He didn't like trouble, but he never allowed others to mess with him either. He treated Michael like that, and he was going to treat other arrogant people like that as well.